Prepare yourself for the terror. The prison of madness, where few enter and none return.
Welcome to Unsung Horrors with Lance and Erica.
Leave all your sanity behind. It can't help you now.
Welcome to Unsung Horrors, the podcast where we review underseen horror movies, specifically those with fewer than 1,000 views on Letterboxd. I'm your co-host Erica, joined by co-host Lance.
Hey, everybody.
And we also have another guest for this episode, Daniel Epler, host of the Cobwebs podcast. Welcome, Daniel.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. This is very exciting. I'm definitely an admirer of the show. I love that you guys are showing love to a lot of deep cuts. Your deep cut knowledge is super, super impressive to me. So I'm honored to be here for sure.
Oh, thank you for that. I'm a huge fan of Cobwebs. You're doing a series right now, Dark Universe. Can you tell everyone a little bit about your podcast and maybe about the series that you're doing right now?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, thank you very much. It's called Cobwebs, a Gothic cinema podcast. The original idea for the podcast was, I guess, a little bit similar to you guys. I wanted to shine light on horror movies that I felt like less people were talking about. The specific goal was to talk about a lot of Hammer films, which is the film that we're going to be talking about right now. A couple of years ago was around when I started the podcast, and I listened to a lot of horror podcasts, and I just felt like nobody was really talking about Hammer films. And sometimes the podcast that I would listen to would say like, oh man, we got to do a Hammer episode one of these days. And I would occasionally send them a message and be like, oh yeah, you should totally do that. That'd be awesome. And it just rarely happened. And I thought, well, you know what? I guess I'll just try and start the podcast that I want to listen to. And I really had no idea how to do a podcast. I feel like now even more so than back then, sort of everyone has a podcast and it's a little bit more common knowledge how to handle it, but I really didn't know how to handle it. And it just started out with me just sitting in front of a microphone, just talking about The Curse of Frankenstein. But eventually I figured out more about how to get guests and then how to do Skype guests. That really opened things up. So basically the podcast is we talk about classic Gothic horror movies and the modern films that inspired them. So I'm pretty liberal with the definition, and that if I feel like it was influenced at least by Universal Monsters, Hammer Horror, Vincent Price, something like that, I can cover newer films. But we definitely focus on Hammer movies and Vincent Price movies the most, I would say. But right now we are doing a series on the Dark Universe, which is really just the term I'm using to describe classic monster reboots from the 2000s. And the idea is each episode we tackle one of those reboots paired with a classic film or an older film that pairs well with it. So we just did an episode on, I think, a very underseen, unsung horror film, Victor Frankenstein, the reboot from 2015. Even though it's starring James McAvoy and Daniel Radcliffe, it's one of the biggest bombs in box office history, really. So we covered that. We're about to do the most pure Dark Universe film, The Mummy. So that's going to be coming up soon. Yes, Tom Cruise versus The Mummy, or as my good friend Mike Scott from Atkins Undisputed calls it, Mummy Impossible. So that is coming up.
Perfect.
But it's been a really fun series because I've discovered, like, yeah, sometimes these movies are as bad as they say, but most of the time I don't think so. I think there's some underloved stuff in this category.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned, reaching out to people who said, oh, we should do a Hammer episode. And my first thought was, episode? That's a whole podcast in and of itself. And so I'm glad that yours exists to do that.
Yeah, and there is a lot more Hammer talk now. I think a lot of that is due to Scream Factory. They've been releasing a lot of Hammer films, so people are like, oh my gosh, there's a beautiful Blu-ray release of Curse of the Werewolf. I'll check that movie out. Yeah. So I'm very thankful Scream Factory is bringing light to these movies because there's a lot more Hammer talk these days, for sure.
Speaking of Hammer, like Daniel mentioned, the movie that we are covering this episode is Never Take Sweets from a Stranger, aka Never Take Candy from a Stranger. The title was changed for the American release. It came out in 1960. This is available to watch on physical media. So if you have the Mill Creek 20 movie Hammer set, it's on there. There's also, I think at the end of last episode when I mentioned the double Blu-ray, I think I said Shout Factory, but that's actually also Mill Creek as well, and that's on a double with Scream of Fear, another great Hammer flick. And it's also on a number of other various Hammer collection DVDs, which actually, when this was initially released, it got shelved and really only came out of obscurity in the 2000s when it was released on DVD. As of this recording, it has 954 views on Letterboxd, so we're sliding in right before it gets to that 1,000 mark. So what Never Takes Sweets from a Stranger is about is Hammer making a movie with a social message. And due to the very taboo subject matter for the time, which was child sex abuse, a disclaimer was actually added to the beginning of the trailer for it.
The crime which we have to consider is an ugly thing. It is also, by its very nature, a secret thing.
An extraordinary announcement from the management. This is the first time we have ever presented a story of this kind. Because it has been told so delicately, we believe every adult will want to see it. Our story takes place in eastern Canada, but it could happen to children anywhere, just as it did one day to Lucille and Jean.
So just getting into a quick summary of the film, the movie opens with two girls, Jean Carter and her friend Lucille. They are playing on a swing in the forest. From a window in a nearby house, you can see an old man watching them with binoculars. After Jean complains about losing her candy money, Lucille tells her that she knows where they can get some for free, and she leads her towards the nearby house. That night, Jean tells her parents that she and Lucille went to the house of an old man who we later find out to be Clarence Olderberry Sr., whose family essentially founded the town, and that he had Jean and Lucille dance naked for candy for him. Jean's parents, Peter and Sally Carter, along with Jean's grandmother, are appalled, and Peter and Sally go to file a complaint with the police the next day. They're met with doubt and resistance with regard to the incident, primarily due to the Olderberry standing within the community, but also because the Carters are new to town, having just moved there for Peter to take the role of the high school principal. Despite the threats from the chief of police and Olderberry Jr., the Carters discover that Olderberry Sr. is known for this kind of behavior, so the complaint is filed and a trial ensues. Lucille's father is determined to have nothing to do with this scandal, so we can assume that because he works for the Olderberry mill. So the Carters are left on their own to go after the pedophile with no one to corroborate Jean's story. Olderberry's defense counsel bullies Jean on the stand, resulting in her becoming confused when answering questions and casting doubt on her story. Olderberry is ultimately acquitted, and the Carters decide they need to leave town after all of this. As Jean's parents are packing, Jean goes to find her friend Lucille to say goodbye. As they're walking, Olderberry Sr. approaches them, and the girls quickly run off into the woods to escape him. Peter Carter learns his daughter is missing, and the police come in to help with the search when they also discover that Olderberry Sr. is missing. Meanwhile, Jean and Lucille reach a boathouse by the lake to get into a rowboat to paddle away, just as Olderberry Sr. reaches the shore. We think the girls have escaped the predator, only to find out that the boat is still tied to the dock. Olderberry grabs a rope and starts to pull the boat back towards the shore. We cut back to the search party, who come upon the boathouse and find Olderberry Sr. ambling around and the body of a dead girl on the floor. Peter Carter returns home with his daughter Jean, who we then find out has managed to escape. Olderberry Jr. breaks down, finally seeing the monster his father is, and tells Sally, as well as the rest of the town people who have gathered at the house, that his father has killed Lucille. So this was directed by Cyril Frankel. He, along with about 17 other films, I guess he's most well known for directing TV episodes of The Avengers. And one other film that I watched recently by him that I recommend and I thought was really good was The Trigon Factor from 1966. It's an Edgar Wallace krimi. It's kind of atypical for Edgar Wallace, but I thought it was a lot of fun. It's got nuns and a heist and kind of kooky in that way. He also directed The Witches from 1966, and I haven't seen this. I wasn't able to track down a copy, but Daniel, I saw that on Letterboxd you had seen this. What are your thoughts on that one?
So The Witches is just not near as good as I wish a Hammer movie called The Witches was. I was very excited when I found out this movie existed because I do love witch horror movies and like folk horror movies, and that's very much what this is. And a Hammer version sounded great, and it's starring Joan Fontaine from Hitchcock's Rebecca. And it's extremely slow and never really gets anywhere until sort of the end. I have no doubt I'll probably watch it more times in my life because I come back to Hammer movies I don't like quite a bit, trying to like them more. But as of now, I'm not a big Witches fan.
Good to know. So Frankel was hired by producer Anthony Hines because of his background in documentary work and also for being known for his ability to direct young actors. Frankel actually didn't even allow the child actors in this film to read the script or even the scenes that they were in, but instead would recite it to them before the scene until they had it memorized. So they would be very much in the moment. Frankel also said in his autobiography that he regards this as one of his best works. And one of the big names behind this film is Freddie Francis. This is actually his first Hammer film. This brought him into the fold. Francis has Oscars for cinematography for Sons and Lovers in 1960 and Glory from 1989. He's known for The Elephant Man, The Innocents, Dune. But aside from his cinematography work, he's also directed 27 films, many of those horror, even though he's actually gone on record saying he doesn't like the genre, which surprises me given how well he directs those films. Most of them. I won't say all. So we actually covered one of the movies. Well, we didn't cover it, but we talked about it. One of the movies that he directed, The Doctor and the Devils, in our Flesh and the Fiends episode. That's one of the takes on Burke and Hare. Francis directed that. Also, Tales from the Crypt, Trog, which I rewatched after I wasn't going to for the podcast. I was like, I've seen it. I don't need to rewatch Trog. But then I watched something, John Waters talking about it, and I really wanted to rewatch it after listening to John Waters talk about Trog. So I did it, and I watched it through a John Waters lens, and I enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun with it. He has also directed Paranoiac, Evil of Frankenstein, The Skull, Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, The Psychopath, The Vampire Happening. And The Vampire Happening, if you haven't seen it, has, I want to say, probably one of my top 5 title credits in it. The artwork in it is just creepy and fantastic. I think I posted it on Instagram, but if anything, just at least check out the opening credits for The Vampire Happening. They're gorgeous. All right. And the score, Elizabeth Lutyens. She was one of the only female film composers at the time. She was often referred to as the horror queen or 12-note Lizzie due to her use of serial music, which involved using all 12 notes of the Western chromatic scale to produce new tonalities and textures. She's actually worked with Francis on a few films that he directed, including the Amicus films, The Psychopath, Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, and The Skull, and also Hammer's Paranoiac. And she did another of note, but I'm going to save that for my double feature because I don't want to spoil that. So the screenwriter is John Hunter. He also penned Pirates of Blood River, which is, I forgot. That's on the 20 movie set, right?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So the movie itself, though, is based on a play called The Pony Cart, written by Roger Garris. Now, Garris wrote it as a warning to parents after his daughter had been molested by a respected figure in the community. The play was discovered by producer Anthony Hines, and he kind of really was the only person that really wanted to make this. They did have backing from Columbia and Hammer, but there was a lot of reluctance behind it. What's interesting about the play is that the play takes place just in the Carter home. All the outside events are just sort of talked about. So Hunter expanded on the play to include the courtroom scene, the final chase scenes through the woods, and many other aspects.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Have you seen or read anything about the Pony Cart, Daniel?
No, I sure don't.
From what it said in the commentary on the Hammer set for this movie, it sounds like it's pretty close to what this is, minus a few changes in characters, but the message is the most important thing in the film, and that stayed true to the original text. All right, so getting into the cast, we have Patrick Allen, who plays the father, Peter Carter. He is also in Dial M for Murder, Threads from 1984, Captain Clegg, a great film from 1962. And I'm going to throw in a super deep cut. He plays the lead in a short movie. It's about 60 minutes long called The 13th Day of Christmas from 1985. This is one that we posted about on our Instagram for the Unsung Christmas Horrors. He plays the son of in a family. He's mentally disturbed, and essentially it's a very, very depressing Christmas movie. So if you're in that mood and want to lean into that feeling, I'd recommend it, but don't watch it if you're looking for a feel-good Christmas movie. We also have Gwen Watford. She plays the mother, Sally Carter. She was also in The Ghoul, directed by Freddie Francis from 1975, and Taste the Blood of Dracula. Janina Fay plays the daughter, Jean Carter. She's got some horror movies in her filmography. She played the young girl in Day of the Triffids. She was same year as this movie. She was also in the Hands of Orlok remake and Two Faces of Dr. Jekyll. And she was also in The Horror of Dracula. That's probably where most people who are familiar with these films would recognize her from. And ironically or fittingly, she was also in a movie called Don't Talk to Strange Men in 1962. So that might make a double feature with this as well. I don't know. I didn't get a chance to watch that one. And then also speaking of Day of the Triffids, Alison Leggett. She plays the grandmother, or Martha. She's also in that movie along with Janina Fay. And then the pedophile, Clarence Olderberry Sr., is played by Sir Felix Aylmer. So he's got a massive number of acting credits, over 100. I've only seen 2, this one and Olivier's Hamlet. And what's interesting about Felix Aylmer taking on this role is he really wanted to do it, which, you would think that someone might have some hesitation about playing a pedophile, but he actually believed he could get away with this role because he had played so many different types of characters over the years. And he was older. So he thought, well, if I'm going to do it, I can get away with it now. And he said, quote, "I believe this film depicts the social problem in the frankest terms. Audiences will undoubtedly have a violent reaction to this film, and especially to me. If my role in this picture, and of course the film itself, saves the life and well-being of one child, I shall be deeply grateful to Anthony Hines, who had the courage to produce it and gave me the opportunity to act in it."
So let me ask, have you not seen Hammer's The Mummy then?
Mm-mm.
Okay, he's in that. He's Stephen Banning, Peter Cushing's father. I think that's the only other Hammer movie he's in. But yeah, so glad he's in this movie because I think he's pretty brilliant.
Yeah, he's
that's one of my favorite Terrence Fisher Hammer movies. Is The Mummy, the best mummy movie I've ever seen by far, and he is great in it.
Well, I have it. I just haven't got to it yet, so I'm moving it up on my list. Then I might wait for October though, because I feel like that would we'll see. I'm going to push it up. I've got 2 people telling me to watch it. So now I feel like, okay, I got to watch it now.
Every month of the year is good for Hammer.
That's true. So some other just sort of production and information of notes. Hammer tried to sell this more as a maniac on the loose type of movie. They kind of downplayed the pedophilia. And, I mentioned earlier that this was essentially shelved upon completion. It did get some minor distribution, so it did get into some theaters, but not like a wide release. Before it was released, though, producers wanted to have it rated an A by the BBFC, which meant that any child could see it if they were accompanied by parents. They wanted them to understand or absorb the message of the title of the movie and the movie itself. But the BBFC did not allow this. One member said that the old man chasing after 2 girls through the woods was likely to terrify children and that they could potentially see all old men as a source of fear. So it wasn't necessarily the subject matter that they had a problem with. It was them being worried about children thinking all old men are predators. So I thought that was interesting.
I'm actually kind of glad that they downplayed the pedophilia in the marketing, because Hammer's marketing is so sensationalistic. If you watch their trailers, you will scream in terror when you see Christopher Lee, and that would probably seem very disrespectful if they're treating pedophilia with that kind of vampire, attitude. But I mean, ideally, they should have marketed this as like a potential Academy Award drama, but I don't think the world was there yet. Today, that's probably how this movie would be marketed, but not in 1960.
Yeah, for sure. It was way ahead of its time in that respect. And I can see how they would have a hard time figuring out how to market something like this, especially from a studio like Hammer. So Anthony Hines, a producer, said this was the only Hammer film with nothing but good reviews, which is true if you discount all the reviews which were about the subject matter and not the film itself, which a lot of reviews were. And then one last thing from the commentary, I might bring up a few other things when we get more into the film. The commentator, Konstantin Nasser, called this Hammer's, quote, most rewarding achievements. The film is a testament to Hammer's effort to break barriers, transcend expectations, and at least in their golden period, make films of the highest caliber. Which I thought was kind of a two-sided compliment to Hammer about, well, at least in their golden age, they tried to make films of the highest caliber. It's like, ooh, a little harsh on Hammer in the later years, but I mean, not untrue. So let's just be fair.
Sounds like somebody hasn't seen Twins of Evil.
True. We're going to get more into the film right after this promo from our network.
You're listening to the Prescribed Films Podcast Network, home to hundreds of hours of free podcast entertainment. The shows on this network all have a common goal, providing you with the best discussions about movies and other forms of entertainment media. The PFPN hopes to fill your earholes with audio joy. Visit our website with links to all the other amazing shows at www.thepfpn.com. Thanks for listening.
So I have a few things to, say about the film, but Daniel, I know you had seen this before I approached you about being a guest for this. Was your first watch of this last year when you got the Hammer set?
Yes, it was, because I made it a goal to watch all of those movies so I could do a Cobwebs episode on that box set. Mm-hmm. So I just binged through all these weird, obscure Hammer movies, and this was absolutely one of the standout watches.
It's one of those things that it's hard to pinpoint because of the subject matter. You kind of have to say, like, well, you want to step back and look at how well the film is done. So what are some things that stand out to you? Like, what you ranked it pretty high, I think like 5th or something like that when you did your Cobwebs episode, or around there. So what makes this rank so high for you, especially considering it's a Hammer film and it's competing against completely different type of films?
Yeah, that's very true. That's probably a good place to start, because I love Hammer movies. If people couldn't tell from when I was talking about Cobwebs, they're one of my favorite kinds of movies, definitely my favorite kind of horror film. And Never Take Sweets from a Stranger is not why I love Hammer. I might compare it to the movie studio from the 1980s, Cannon, has been very much on my mind lately and in my movie watching lately, a lot because of a recent Screen Drafts episode on them, because I love that podcast. And this kind of makes me think of Love Streams, which is a John Cassavetes movie that Cannon actually produced. And it's like, you may love Cannon and you may love Love Streams, but Love Streams is not why you love Cannon. And Never Take Sweets from a Stranger is not why I love Hammer. It's very different. I love their fun movies, their classic gothic horrors, their ridiculous but pulpy, trashy thrillers, their fun adventure movies. And Never Take Sweets from a Stranger is not any of those things, but I think maybe one of the reasons that I loved it so much is I was watching it in the middle of such a binge on these Hammer movies. And like not long ago, I had watched a movie called The Full Treatment, which is a pulpy black and white thriller that's on that box set. And The Full Treatment is like fun and silly, but it is ridiculous and sometimes offensive in like every way. And then I watched Never Take Sweets from a Stranger, and it's taking an important subject matter very, very seriously. It's brilliantly acted. I mean, even compared to, I mean, pretty much all Hammer movies are brilliantly acted. It's probably their standout feature. This one very much is from everybody. It's very interesting. It has a lot on its mind. It's like 80 minutes long, so it's extremely tight and it never wastes a second. And I have to say, the third act is, I think, the scariest thing Hammer has ever done. And Hammer is normally not scary to me. I love their Dracula movies and their Frankenstein movies more than almost anything, but they're not scary ever. I mean, I'm sure they were in their time, but they're not now. But Never Take Sweets from a Stranger is to this day.
Yeah, I think that I agree. Like, for its time, the typical Hammer movies, they probably definitely scared people. Not so much now. You can say that they're creepy and effective and have great atmosphere and all of those things that carry through, but actually being scared by it or having it resonate with you after watching it, especially that rowboat scene. And Lance, you had that in your review on Letterboxd, I saw.
That, yeah, like Dana just said, I mean, the third act, like the finale of this film just had me started with that rowboat scene, where Olderberry starts pulling the girls back to the shore towards him. But as soon as I saw that the rope was still tied, my jaw just dropped. Like, I was not expecting that. And then from there, you go into the old, beat up barn where the reveal of Lucille's dead body is covered up, which gave me like a Ray Brower Stand By Me dead body vibe, which that dead body and Stand By Me still haunts me like to this day. But yeah, it's terrifying. I mean, it is legitimately scary, which is kind of strange because, when you see a Hammer Film Productions on the title card or Anthony Hines' name splash across the screen, it's associated with, Curse of Frankenstein, Brides of Dracula, those very sensationalized horror movies. So when it is such a nice surprise as you're watching this, just how different it is from the horror catalog. But they do have some good thrillers. Paranoia, I think, is kind of a thriller with Oliver Reed, and the Betty Davis Nanny or The Anniversary. Those are some, legit movies that you wouldn't really consider common horror, Hammer horror. But Never Take Sweets from a Stranger it really blew me away. I was like you've already pointed out too. It was way ahead of its time, 1960. It's kind of wild to think that was made then.
Yeah, I think and I know, people who know me probably think like, oh, Erica picked it just because like a child dies in Stranger Danger. And okay, fine, fair, small part. But really, it is about, look what else Hammer did. Because if you think you know Hammer, yeah, you've seen most of them. But there's this one movie in there where they were like, we're going to make a social message film. And it's essentially Oscar caliber, like Daniel said, for its time. And it is a phenomenal piece, and it's atypical for what you expect Hammer to be. And so I think it's important for people that are fans of Hammer to see something like this and understand, what it is they tried to do, not only because of how good of a film it is, but because this actually has an impact on Hammer's trajectory after this. Because if you look at what they put out after this, they didn't try to make another social message film after this. They were like, nope, we're gonna just go on this, horror thriller trajectory after this movie, because they saw that obviously money probably had a lot to do with it, but I think they saw like, okay, well, world's not ready for that yet. Let's just stick with our formula here.
Yeah, and the head of Hammer, James Carreras, when he talked about this movie, he was like, I tried to make a message picture, but nobody bought it. I'm an artist. I'm not an artist. I'm a businessman.
Right. Yeah. So one of the things that stands out the most for me, Daniel mentioned all of the very standout performances and the acting in this. Felix Aylmer in this as Olderberry Sr. never speaks a word of dialogue, but is one of the most terrifying monsters I've ever seen in a Hammer movie. It's fantastic. And I love his introduction, not the very beginning where I do love that part too. The part where he's watching the little kids with the binoculars. To be clear, I'm not liking that he's watching children, but his introduction to them. Well, I'm going to have to be careful with how I word things. Okay. After they have the meeting at the school and the Carters are talking to another couple, you see the this bust statue of Olderberry Sr. in the background. And as they approach it, the lights turn off and it casts a dark shadow on the statue. It's this like great shot foreshadowing like this is your villain without even having to say it, even though we obviously got a hint at that from the very opening when the girls are running towards he's watching them through the binoculars.
Yeah. And I mean, did anybody else get Donald Pleasance or Ed Koch, like the former New York City mayor vibes when watching Olderberry on screen?
Definitely Donald Pleasance for sure.
Absolutely Donald Pleasance for sure.
Yeah, I just almost envisioned him in the role, but yeah, his performance is just, without a word of dialogue uttered, is just brilliant.
Yeah. So Lance, you usually are the one that talks about the score. Did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I was very interested when I saw it was Elizabeth Lutyens, who, there's not a whole lot of, unfortunately, female composers out there working on film. There are more so, which is good, since 1960. But she had a very whimsical take, because I did watch some of her other films before this episode, Paranoiac and Dr. Terror's House of Horrors. I don't think her genre is horror. And it looks like she's done a lot of like sci-fi stuff, before this and after, because she does have a very whimsical, I don't know. I mean, especially the entrance or the introduction, like it kicks off right away with an icky feeling. The old man looking at the girls, as it's been said. But as soon as the title card comes on, it's almost like a very uplifting Disney vibe. Like it gives you, I mean, you do know something bad is going to happen, and there's going to be some uncomfortable scenes where you kind of have to envision these perverted actions that are happening off screen. Mm-hmm. So I respected the truthful setup. The music, it just somehow added to that element that you're not going to get everything that you're thinking, from a Hammer film. The music just kind of, it wasn't your standard Hammer score, which isn't as dramatic, and it doesn't set up the horror essentially. Right. But I did like it. I mean, I liked her work for sure.
Okay. So some of the themes that come through in a movie like this, you've got the sort of small town mentality, rich being able to sort of manipulate justice in their favor, newcomers not being welcome, but more importantly, excusing or enabling those rich people, or the hand that feeds them. And we get that especially with Lucille's family when her father refuses to let his daughter testify and be part of this whole trial because he works for the Olderberry Mill. Daniel, I'll ask you this. What did you think about how that came across, like that sort of small town mentality?
Yeah, the horror of the town itself stood out to me quite a bit, because I think it's one of the two things that really bring the horror of this movie. One is the horror of the old man, the horror of sexual assault, but the other is the horror of reactions to sexual assault allegations. And this movie has a lot to say about victim blaming, and that the family and the daughter are blamed for this by a lot of people in the town. There's a real attitude of, you know what, this might have happened. We're not really denying it, but this is not something we want to deal with. So can we please just ignore it and move on with our lives? And it really shows you that our culture today has learned nothing from movies like this that try to talk about this. We pretty much act the same way. It's a fascinating scene when the mother goes to the sheriff, and the sheriff's reaction is very much like that. Are you sure you want to do this? Because this is going to have a lot of trouble for your family. And like, wouldn't you rather just not have trouble? Wouldn't you rather just not ruffle the feathers of the most powerful family in town? Even when the immediate family finds out about this from their daughter, the only one of the family that reacts with instant just horror and disgust, and we have to do something about this, is the mother. The grandmother's reaction to sort of, you know what, this sucks, but this is the way things are. Like, there are people out there like this, and it's better to just kind of overlook it, because I think it's a little bit of a British mentality of like, we don't want to deal with things that are unseemly. We don't want to talk about them. We just kind of pretend that everything is good in polite society. And the father even immediately reacts with thinking about reputation and finances. And it's not until his daughter's trauma really surfaces, like in the next few minutes, that he changes his tune on that. But yeah, just the town being against you is very much a theme in this movie, and it's where I think a lot of the horror comes through.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's immediately brought up too, by the captain that you said too, Daniel, and the mother brings it up, the mother-in-law, that they're foreigners. They keep bringing up, oh, well, we're foreigners, and this is a tight knit small town, and they have. How are they going to perceive us? These, I think they're called lousy outsiders by a young Olderberry. So there's definitely that commentary too, almost kind of meshing in there, like, with some sort of foreigner prejudice going on. And then it also and then it goes on forward and exposes the corruption within the justice system, where they're just, if you have, a wealthy family name caring only about their image, they'll do whatever it takes to uphold that image that they've created to pretty much fool a lot of followers and a lot of, most of the community, or the fact, that they did establish a community because they run this sawmill factory. But it's kind of like a social commentary that the rich can get away with murder, which, still rings true.
Yeah. The death of Lucille in this it's so effective in communicating that message of, you can't sweep this under the rug. You can't stand by and say, no, we're going to ignore this, because now you're going to pay the ultimate consequence for this, because Lucille is the one who ends up dying. We don't know that at first. We just see the body of a dead girl. So we're left sort of in suspense for a few minutes. And when we do find out it's Lucille, it's like, well, yeah, that makes perfect sense in the scheme of the film, because her parents, mostly the father, were the ones who said, no, we're not going to take on Olderberry because, he's part of this community. He employs me. They don't want anything to do with that scandal, and they pay the ultimate price for that. And their daughter is murdered.
Economics come into this a lot, where people are afraid of the Olderberries because they control a lot of people's jobs, and people are like, yeah, I want to protect my kids, but I also want to feed my kids. And if I have the choice, I'm going to have to keep my job. The Olderberries have such an economic stranglehold on this town.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most frustrating things too, is when there's a number of characters in this who are like, oh yeah, we know he's Olderberry. He's just like that. We know all about him and his tendencies. I think they use some very polite word about it. And that's one of the most frustrating things to me in that, is knowing it and just accepting it. And it's just like, I cannot, it's hard to take, even especially for something. We still see that, like Daniel said today, we're still seeing movies being made about victim shaming, and it's frustrating, but it's also, I think this is an important film to watch.
I am interested to see and read a little more about Pony Cart, because as you said, it takes place fully in the Carter house, because the most fascinating scenes are, between the Carter family, especially in that opening scene when we're watching how they're handling of learning what happened to Jean, and then just their progression. Because right away, the father immediately says, if he touched her, I swear I'll kill the swine, which is just his first, Hugh Jackman in Prisoners reaction.
What?
That's just, maybe that'll be a double feature pick for me.
Oh, God.
But then, them wanting to immediately call the police, which is always the mother's, end goal here to have some sort of action taken on to, this Olderberry. Everybody bringing a different angle to the obviously immoral, just unnatural event that the child shared, but then the mother coming in, and kind of discussing what about Peter's job and et cetera, et cetera. That scene stands out from the entire film to me, because it's very real. And then also later in the Carter house, when I think Peter tells his wife Sally to stay home in case Jean comes back. It's when they go look for Jean and Lucille in the woods. She says something like, "She's not coming back. I know it." And that is another terrifying moment. As a viewer, you believe her because she's the mother and she has these, these feelings with her daughter. And I'm really interested to seek out Pony Cart because my favorite scenes were between the family. So I think John Hunter did an amazing job adding on the trial, everything else, outside the Carter house. But those scenes in particular are really stand out to me.
Yeah, for sure.
I guess just because we haven't mentioned it all yet, I'll just throw some love to the courtroom sequence, which in my memory was much bigger part of the film. But on rewatch, I was like, wow, this is short. This goes by really, really fast.
Yeah.
But it is a great little courtroom drama in the middle of this movie. The sequence where the prosecutor is interrogating Jean is horrifying. And I really hope nothing like that happens in real life, but I just don't know. It probably has. But it is just such a brutal realization, that whole sequence of, we can't do anything about this legally. They're absolutely going to get off. And it's a scary sequence and it's very intense.
Yes. I agree with that. I mean, coming from a Hammer film in the 60s, it's just really impressive and probably really eye-opening to those who saw it, especially during that time in the 60s, because, it exposes, the behind the scene conversations where it explains like all the things like intrusive medical examinations and tests that we expected on the victim. I get it. It's a trial, but it's a gross tactic to potentially throw out or dismiss this case. And, it kind of shows how wrong the justice system can be, because creepy Olderberry is cleared, he's acquitted, and then shortly after he kills a young girl. So it's, that scene is terrible. That's fascinating scene too, that whole trial.
I do love a good courtroom drama. And I like that. I agree that his cross-examination or his interrogation of her on the witness stand, it's intense, but it doesn't have this sort of posturing and sensationalism. It everything else in here tells the story very matter-of-factly, and it plays out more like what's the term I want? Like a docudrama almost, especially with the addition of that courtroom scene right there in the middle of it. And I like it for that. So let's get to let's get to our recommendations here. So Daniel, you're our guest. I'll start with you. What'd you give this on Letterboxd, and what would you pair this with in a double feature, and why?
So I gave this a 4 out of 5 on Letterboxd. Great movie. Not a fun movie or a movie that I'm going to come back to again and again, but a great film. One of the must-see Hammer movies, I think. As far as a double feature, I'm not going to lie to you guys. I really struggled with this. This isn't really the kind of fun horror movie that's like fun to program for a double feature. I did think about the theme of sexual assault and the possible catharsis of the rape revenge genre, but like that just seemed too icky to me. Like, and if you guys did that, like, no judgment. For me, I felt uncomfortable, going that direction. Because to me, like double feature themes should be fun, and that's not much fun. I thought about courtroom drama, but then I'm going outside the horror genre, and this is unsung horrors. So I did go with the other aspect of this movie that I really love, which is the theme of the town being against you. So I thought, well, I'll pair it with a horror movie that's fun so that it'll come after this movie and there are themes that carry over, but we can like take a breath and be like, oh, okay, like that was the intense real life horror movie, and now we're going to get into something a lot more fun. So I went with the 2001 Stuart Gordon film Dagon, which is a which is a Lovecraft adaptation about a couple who have a boat crash and get stranded out in the ocean, but they're right near a town. So they swim to the nearby town. And it turns out the town is all under the hold of not a powerful family, but of a ancient sea god. And they are all turning into fish people. And they are going to eventually join with their sea god Dagon in the ocean and live there with him for eternity. So it is a crazy, crazy movie, but I think it's enormously entertaining. I just think it's so much fun. It has great Lovecraftian horror. It's got all the tentacles and gross looking creatures you could want. And I think it just carries over the theme of the very structure of this town, the way this town is built is against you. and there is no hope. So I love Dagon, and I think it might be a more fun way to end this double feature.
Nice.
Good pick.
Yeah, for sure. Lance, what about you?
I rated it 3.5 out of 5 on Letterboxd. I would totally recommend this, not only to all horror film fanatics, but to anybody who just loves a great thriller. But for double feature, I kind of stuck with the downer mood. This will be a kind of a rough night for you guys if you guys are going to be trying this out. But I did mention Prisoners earlier because I kept thinking like Hugh Jackman. I wanted to see more of the angry father, but I went with the Little Girl Who Lives Down the Lane from 1976.
Nice.
Directed by Nicholas Gessner. Starring Jodie Foster, Martin Sheen, and Scott Jacoby, who starred as Ronald in the TV movie horror Bad Ronald from 1974. He did a great job in this. But the entire town is essentially turning a blind eye to a known pedophile who's played by Martin Sheen. But the young girl, she's 13, and I think Jodie Foster was really 13 when she played this part. She's much tougher and way more aware than poor little Jean and Lucille and Never Take Sweets from a Stranger. But on top of that, the Jodie Foster character is hiding some really dark secrets herself. So it makes for a captivating watch as you wait to see how she'll deal with this perverted Sheen character, as well as all the secrets she's keeping. But yeah, all the performances are really great, especially Jodie Foster, who just, she just blows it out of the water. But the young girl here is kind of flipped the standard narrative of children being unaware and defenseless in situations like this. I mean, we should never overlook that, but it's kind of cool to see how it kind of empowers the victim in this role. And it has just similarities, but from a completely different perspective.
Yeah, it's a great pick. Jodie Foster is fantastic in that movie.
Yeah, I've never seen this one. Sounds great. Sounds like a downer, but does sound great.
It's not as much of a downer as Never Take Sweets, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, there's some murder, there's some murders happening, but it's you kind of applaud them in a very sick way. But
all right, I guess our scale is going up because, if you know our tagline for this podcast, Erica is dead inside. I'm going to make you really, really fucking uncomfortable right now, people. I am doing a Stranger Danger double feature, actually a double and a half feature. So I'm going to play Never Take Sweets from a Stranger first. Then in between the movies, I'm also going to play a 20-minute British scare film from 1971 called Never Go With Strangers, which was also scored by Lettians, which is why I didn't mention it going through some of the films that she's scored before. If you are one of our very few listeners from across the pond, you can watch this on the BFI player. Domestic listeners, sorry, I don't have a solution for you. All right, so that's going in the middle. It's one of those 70s scare films that, while the message is important, it also has that sort of weird 70s scare film element that is a little bit more lighthearted, I guess. And then we're going to end it with a TV movie from 1981 called Fallen Angel. This stars Ronnie Cox, Melinda Dillon, she's the mom from A Christmas Story, Richard Masur, and Dana Hill as a young girl who falls into the trap of a child pedophile. This is on YouTube if you want to watch it. Fair warning, you will need to take a shower after watching this movie. And if you're worried about Dana Hill, because there is a scene in this movie where Richard Masur tells her to get naked for photographs, you do see her from the shoulders up taking off clothes. She was 17 at the time, or 17 or 18 at the time that she made this, but she has a form of diabetes that caused her to look very young. So she played roles like this well into her late 20s, early 30s before she passed away. So I am fully leaning into the Stranger Danger theme. I'm going to give you a very uncomfortable night because I'm dead inside. So So you've got a much more fun picture with Daniel. You can go a little bit icky with Lance, or you can go full on ick with me.
I like this spectrum.
Yes.
All right, so let's talk about what we're going to watch next episode. Lance, what are we watching?
Next episode, my pick is the Swedish thriller Vaxdocken, or The Doll, from 1962. It's directed by Arne Mattsson. We follow Lundgren, a very sad and lonely night watchman who works overnights at a local department store, develop an obsession with one of the store's mannequins. He steals the mannequin one evening, brings it to his apartment, and creates a relationship with her, until one day she comes to life, or at least to Lundgren she has, which sends him into a tailspin, not quite knowing how to handle his new lover and the fellow tenants occupying the building he lives in. So this isn't necessarily considered a horror film. I think it's categorized as a thriller, drama, but I consider it a horror in the same vein as Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, because it has this dark, incredibly tense underlying tone from the start. We're just expecting everything to come crashing down at some point, and it all leads up to an incredibly creepy finale that I think definitely enters the realm of horror. So it currently has only 188 views on Letterboxd. You can find some great qualities of the full movie free on YouTube. You can search Vaxdocken, spelled Vaxdockan, or you can search The Doll 1962 and you'll find it. All versions are in Swedish, so switch on those closed captions and get lost for an hour and a half in this 1960s black and white thriller.
I'm excited for this one. That one, is there a write-up on that in that Swedish Sensation Films book?
There is, yeah. So I've been reading that book, for the last couple of weeks on and off, or just going back to it. And I've been watching a lot of Swedish movies. Actually, Mannequin in Red, who was directed by the same director who did Vaxdocken, Arne Mattsson. That was my double feature pick for Crystal Eyes.
Right. Okay. That's why it sounded familiar. Okay.
It's a weird little art house pick for unsung horrors, but it needs more eyes on it.
There's nothing wrong with that. I love my weird art house movies, so I'm stoked. I'm excited for this one.
I gotta say, I'm already very excited to hear the double feature picks for your next episode. Hopefully there's some Andrew McCarthy and Kim Cattrall love on there.
There's gotta be. There'll definitely be some shout outs there.
Yeah. I feel like I'm gonna go on a binge of mannequin horror movies to find some like weird deep cut double feature. But I think, Lance, you got the good one with Mannequin. What was it, Mannequin in Red?
Yeah, Mannequin in Red.
Okay. All right. If you are not already, please give us a follow on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, all at Unsung Horrors. You can follow me on Letterboxd at the username Also Watched. You can also follow my other podcast, Customers Also Watched, which is about movies streaming for free on Amazon Prime. That's CAW Podcast on Twitter, or Customers Also Watched on Instagram or Facebook. Lance, where can people follow you?
You can find me at L Scheibe on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd.
And Daniel, what about you and Cobwebs?
Yeah, you can find my podcast on all podcast apps. It's called Cobwebs, a Gothic Cinema podcast. Just a quick, more specific, shameless plug. If you are interested, because of this episode, on like picking up that Mill Creek 20 film collection, which this film appears on, you can check out an episode of Cobwebs in which we reviewed that entire box set. I did it with Aaron Pinn, the YouTuber, and we actually ranked all the movies, so you can kind of get an idea of which movies you might want to check out first, other than Never Take Sweets from a Stranger. And you can follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at CobwebsPod, and you can follow me personally on Twitter at Epler Daniel.
Awesome. Yeah. Highly recommend that episode from Daniel and Aaron. It's a great listen and helped me prioritize all the movies on that set.
Well, thank you.
Of course. Well, thank you, Daniel, for coming on and being our guest and talking about this movie with us.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
So next time we get a Hammer film, we'll be reaching out. So.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks again, Daniel, for joining us. And thanks, everyone, for listening. Bye.
Bye, everyone.